A father raises a blade over his only son. No hesitation, no mercy, just faith pushed to the edge of madness. This is the moment that would define a bloodline for 4,000 years. Long before this altar, before the fire and the knife, there was just a man from a land of idols, told by a voice he couldn't see to leave everything he'd ever known. His name was Abram. He had no map, no promise fulfilled, only a whisper that said, "Go, and I will make you great." What followed was a test no man should survive: betrayal, exile, war, and a covenant written not in ink, but in blood. This is the story of the man who became the father of nations. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim alike all trace their soul back to him. But to understand how the world's greatest fates were born, we have to go back to the day one man was asked to kill his own child. Stay with me. This is the story of Abraham. What if the man history calls righteous once bowed before gods of stone and fire? This is the story they don't want you to know. Over 4,000 years ago, in the great city of Ur, along the banks of the Euphrates, a family lived among 1,000 idols. Ur was a city devoted to Sin, the moon god, its people bound by ritual, sacrifice, and gods carved by human hands. Among these people lived Terah, a maker of idols, a father whose household would one day change the course of human history. Terah had 3 sons, and among them was Abram, a quiet man living an ordinary life beneath the shadow of his father's trade. Tragedy struck early. Abram's brother Haran died in Ur, leaving behind a son named Lot, and a wound that never fully healed. Abram married Sarai, a woman of striking presence, yet their household carried a quiet sorrow, for Sarai could not bear children. For reasons lost to time, Terah gathered his family and possessions, setting out on a journey away from Ur, toward distant Canaan. But the journey stalled far short of its destination, in a city called Haran, where Terah's family would settle for years to come. Haran became home. Here, Terah grew old, and Abram lived in relative comfort, his future uncertain, his purpose not yet revealed. Then, without warning, everything changed. A voice unseen, undeniable, spoke into the silence of Abram's ordinary life. "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household," the voice commanded, "and go to the land I will show you." The voice made an extraordinary promise: to make of Abram a great nation, to bless him, and through him, bless all the earth. There was no map given, no destination named, only a promise and a command, and Abram would have to decide how to answer. Abram shared the calling with Sarai, and though the future remained unknown, she chose to stand beside him, wherever the path might lead. Terah died in Haran at the age of 205, and with his passing, nothing remained to hold Abram back any longer. At 75 years old, Abram gathered his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, his servants, and all he owned, and prepared to leave. He left behind the only home he had known, walking away from certainty and comfort, trusting a voice with no visible form. This single act of departure would become one of the most consequential decisions in the history of faith, though Abram could not have known it. If this story of faith and sacrifice moves you, consider subscribing, because what unfolds next will test one man beyond imagination. Ahead lay Canaan, a land Abram had never seen, inhabited by strangers, promised to him by a God he could not touch. This was the beginning, not of comfort, but of covenant. The story of Abraham, father of nations, had only just begun. Abram entered Canaan and came first to Shechem, a fertile valley marked by a great oak tree, sacred to the people who lived there. Here, the voice spoke again, promising that this very land, unfamiliar and foreign, would one day belong to Abram's descendants forever. In response, Abram built an altar to the Lord, marking the land with worship rather than conquest, faith rather than force. From Shechem, Abram journeyed onward, moving toward the hill country between Bethel and Ai, pitching his tents upon unfamiliar ground. At Bethel, Abram built a second altar, calling upon the name of the Lord, a man learning, step by step, to trust the unseen. But the land offered no comfort. A severe famine spread across Canaan, threatening the survival of Abram's household and all he had gathered. With no rain and no harvest, Abram made a fateful decision: to travel south, into the powerful and prosperous land of Egypt. Egypt was a land of abundance, fed by the Great Nile, ruled by a pharaoh whose power stretched across the ancient world. As they approached the border, fear crept into Abram's heart, for Sarai's beauty was undeniable, and Pharaoh's men were known to kill for it. Abram asked Sarai to say she was his sister, not his wife, believing this lie might protect his own life at her expense. It was a plan built on fear rather than faith, a decision that would soon spiral far beyond Abram's control or intention. As predicted, Pharaoh's officials noticed Sarai immediately, and word of her beauty traveled swiftly to the royal palace itself. Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's household, and in exchange, Abram received sheep, oxen, servants, and camels, riches built on deception. Yet this wealth came at a devastating cost, for Abram had traded his wife's safety for his own protection and material gain. But the Lord intervened. Severe plague struck Pharaoh's household suddenly, a divine response to a marriage built upon a hidden lie. Pharaoh soon discovered the truth and summoned Abram, demanding to know why he had been deceived about Sarai's true identity. "Why did you not tell me she was your wife?" Pharaoh demanded, his voice thundering with betrayal and righteous anger. Rather than punishing Abram further, Pharaoh ordered his men to escort the entire household safely out of Egypt, wealth intact. Abram left Egypt wealthier in possessions, yet humbled in spirit, a man confronted with the painful weight of his own fear. He returned to the altar he had built before, a physical reminder of the faith he still struggled to fully embrace. There, once again, Abram called upon the name of the Lord, carrying forward both his failures and his unwavering hope. Abram's journey had only begun, and ahead lay choices even more difficult, tests that would define the covenant yet to come. As Abram and Lot's households grew wealthier, the land could no longer sustain both their flocks, herds, and growing number of servants. Tension rose between their herdsmen, quarrels breaking out daily over grazing land, water rights, and the strain of shared resources. Abram, wishing to preserve peace within the family, called Lot aside, determined to resolve the conflict before it deepened further. "Let there be no conflict between us," Abram said, offering Lot first choice of the land spread out before them. Lot's eyes settled on the fertile plains near the Jordan, lush like the garden of the Lord, rich with promise and abundance. Lot chose the plain and moved his tents toward Sodom, a city already known for its wealth, corruption, and moral decay. Abram remained in Canaan, watching his nephew depart toward comfort, while he stayed behind in the harder, hill country land. Once again, the Lord spoke to Abram, renewing his promise that all the land he could see would belong to his descendants. "Walk through the length and breadth of the land," the voice instructed, "for I am giving it to you and your offspring." Meanwhile, far to the east, powerful kings prepared for war, their ambitions setting the stage for violent conquest and bloodshed. For kings from the east marched against 5 kings of the plain, including the rulers of Sodom and Gomorrah themselves. The battle turned disastrous for the kings of the plain, their armies scattered, fleeing into pits of tar and desert ravines. The victorious kings plundered Sodom and Gomorrah completely, seizing goods, food, and captives, among them Abram's nephew Lot. A survivor escaped the chaos and rushed to warn Abram, revealing that Lot had been captured and taken away as plunder. Without hesitation, Abram armed 318 trained men born within his household, preparing for a daring rescue mission. Abram divided his forces and launched a surprise attack under cover of darkness, pursuing the enemy as far as Dan. The surprise assault shattered the enemy's defenses, scattering their forces and forcing a chaotic, desperate retreat into the night. Abram recovered all the plundered goods, rescued the captured people, and found Lot alive among those taken from Sodom. Returning triumphant, Abram was met by Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High, in the Valley of the Kings. Melchizedek blessed Abram, praising the God who delivered his enemies into his hand, and Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. The king of Sodom offered Abram the recovered wealth, but Abram refused, unwilling to let anyone claim credit for his blessing. Abram had proven himself not only a man of faith, but a man of courage. Yet the greatest test still awaited him. After the battle, The word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, offering comfort and reassurance amid his uncertainty. "Do not be afraid," the voice said, "I am your shield, and your reward shall be exceedingly great beyond measure." Yet Abram voiced his deepest grief. He remained childless, and his estate would pass to a servant, not his own son. The Lord brought Abram outside and told him to count the stars, if indeed he was able to number them all. "So shall your offspring be," the voice declared, a promise so vast it defied all logic and human possibility. Abram believed the Lord, and this simple, quiet act of faith was credited to him as righteousness before God. The Lord instructed Abram to prepare a covenant ceremony, dividing sacrificial animals and arranging them carefully in two facing rows. As the sun began to set, birds of prey swooped down upon the carcasses, and Abram fought fiercely to protect them. As the sun set completely, a deep and dreadful darkness fell upon Abram, and he sank into a terrifying, trance-like sleep. Within this darkness, the Lord revealed a difficult future. Abram's descendants would become strangers, enslaved in a foreign land. For 400 years they would suffer, yet afterward emerge with great possessions, liberated and brought back to this promised land. Then a smoking firepot and blazing torch passed between the divided pieces, symbolizing God alone sealing this unbreakable covenant. In that ancient ceremony, the Lord bound himself to a promise, giving Abram's descendants land from Egypt to the Euphrates. Yet years passed, and still Sarai remained barren, her hopes slowly hardening into desperation and quiet, aching frustration. Sarai proposed a solution common to her culture, that Abram father a child through her servant, Hagar, instead. Abram agreed to Sarai's plan, and Hagar became his wife in this arrangement, carrying the weight of impossible expectations. When Hagar conceived, her attitude toward Sarai changed, and contempt crept into glances exchanged between the two women. Sarai blamed Abram for the disrespect she now endured, and tension exploded into open conflict within the household. Mistreated and desperate, Hagar fled into the wilderness, alone and pregnant, seeking escape from Sarai's harsh treatment. Beside a spring in the wilderness, an angel of the Lord found Hagar, addressing her directly amid her deepest despair. The angel promised Hagar countless descendants through her son, instructing her to return and submit to Sarai once more. Hagar returned and bore a son named Ishmael, and Abram, now 86 years old, embraced fatherhood at last. 13 years passed after Ishmael's birth, years of quiet routine, as Abram settled into life as a father at last. Abram had grown old, his body worn by decades of wandering, yet the promise of countless descendants remained unfulfilled. Then the Lord appeared to Abram once more, declaring himself God Almighty, calling Abram to walk blamelessly before him. "I will make my covenant between me and you," the voice declared, "and will greatly increase your numbers beyond imagination." God announced a change. Abram, meaning exalted father, would now be called Abraham, meaning father of many nations. This new name carried extraordinary weight, a permanent reminder of the promise that would define his entire remaining life. God promised Abraham the entire land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, sealing his covenant across countless future generations. As a sign of this covenant, God commanded that every male among Abraham's household be circumcised as a lasting mark. This covenant applied not only to Abraham's descendants, but to every servant born in his house or bought with silver. That very day, Abraham obeyed completely, circumcising himself, his son Ishmael, and every male within his entire household. Abraham was 99 years old when he performed this act, a physical seal upon an already unbreakable spiritual promise. God then turned to address Sarai directly, declaring that her name too would change, becoming Sarah, meaning princess. "I will bless her," the voice continued, "and she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham fell face down and laughed, questioning silently how a man of 100 could father a child at all. "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing," Abraham said quietly, perhaps hoping this promise could be fulfilled through him instead. But God answered clearly, Sarah herself would bear a son, and Abraham was to name him Isaac, meaning laughter. God promised to establish his everlasting covenant specifically through Isaac, though Ishmael too would be blessed and multiply greatly. With these words spoken, God finished speaking with Abraham and departed, leaving him alone with the weight of the promise. Abraham returned to Sarah, carrying news that would soon reach her ears, a promise both wondrous and impossible to comprehend. That day marked a turning point, a covenant sealed in flesh, binding Abraham's household permanently to God's unfolding purpose. Yet beneath this joy lingered tension, for two sons now stood in the shadow of one impossible, singular promise. Abraham had received new names, a new covenant, and new hope, yet the greatest tests of his faith still lay ahead. One scorching afternoon, as Abraham sat resting at the entrance of his tent near the great trees of Mamre, something unusual occurred. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing nearby, and without hesitation, he rushed forward to greet them warmly. He bowed low to the ground, offering water, rest, and food, insisting they not pass by without receiving his hospitality. Abraham hurried into the tent, instructing Sarah to prepare bread, while a tender calf was selected and quickly cooked. As the visitors ate beneath the shade of the trees, Abraham stood attentively by, unaware of the divine identity before him. One of the visitors asked where Sarah was, then declared that within a year she would surely bear a son. Sarah, listening from inside the tent entrance, laughed silently to herself, doubting such a promise at her advanced age. Why did Sarah laugh? The visitor asked pointedly, revealing that nothing was too difficult or hidden from the Lord. Sarah denied laughing, gripped by sudden fear, but the visitor firmly corrected her, confirming exactly what had occurred. As the visitors prepared to leave, Abraham walked with them, looking out toward the distant plains below Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord revealed his intention to investigate the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, cities notorious for their profound wickedness. Abraham approached boldly, questioning whether the righteous would perish alongside the wicked in the coming judgment. Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city, Abraham asked. Will you sweep it away and not spare it? The Lord agreed that for 50 righteous people, the entire city would be spared from complete and total destruction. Abraham persisted, lowering the number repeatedly, 45, 40, 30, 20, each time receiving the same merciful answer. Finally, Abraham asked about just 10 righteous people, and the Lord agreed that even 10 would be enough to spare the city. 2 angels continued towards Sodom, arriving at evening, where Lot sat at the city gate and welcomed them immediately. That night, the men of Sodom surrounded Lot's house, demanding access to the visitors with violent, predatory intent. The angels struck the crowd with blindness, protecting the household while urging Lot to gather his family and flee immediately. At dawn, the angels physically pulled Lot's family from the city, warning them not to look back as they escaped. The Lord rained down burning sulfur upon Sodom and Gomorrah, utterly destroying the cities and everything living within the plain. Abraham rose early and looked toward the plain, watching smoke rise like a furnace, devastating proof of judgment fulfilled. As promised, the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and at the appointed time, she conceived a son in her old age. Sarah bore Abraham a son in his old age, exactly at the time God had promised, defying every law of nature. Abraham named his son Isaac, meaning laughter, a permanent reminder of the joy and disbelief surrounding his miraculous birth. When Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, faithfully fulfilling the covenant God had established years earlier. Sarah declared that God had brought her laughter, and all who heard of Isaac's birth would laugh with her too. Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned, celebrating the son who fulfilled a lifetime of waiting. But Sarah noticed Ishmael, Hagar's son, mocking Isaac during the festivities, and old tensions resurfaced with sudden intensity. Sarah demanded that Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael, insisting Ishmael would never share Isaac's inheritance or birthright. This request distressed Abraham greatly, for despite everything, Ishmael remained his son, deeply loved despite the circumstances. God spoke to Abraham that night, instructing him to listen to Sarah, for through Isaac his covenant would continue. Yet God also promised Ishmael's protection, declaring he too would father a great nation, though separate from the covenant line. Early the next morning, Abraham rose and prepared provisions, his hands trembling as he faced this heartbreaking obligation. Abraham gave Hagar bread and water, placing them on her shoulders, and sent her away with young Ishmael beside her. Hagar wandered into the desert of Beersheba, carrying little more than what Abraham had given, uncertain of what lay ahead. When the water ran out, Hagar placed Ishmael beneath a bush, unable to bear watching her son die of thirst. She sat nearby and wept, lifting her voice in anguish, believing all hope for her son had finally run out. But God heard the boy crying, and an angel called to Hagar from heaven, urging her not to be afraid. Isaac remained, the promised son, the heir of covenant. Yet the hardest test of Abraham's faith had not yet come. God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water, rushing immediately to fill the skin and save her son. Ishmael was saved, and God remained with the boy as he grew strong, living in the wilderness of Paran. Ishmael grew into a skilled archer, and Hagar found him a wife from her homeland, establishing his own household eventually. Though separated permanently from Ishmael, Abraham's heart remained divided, carrying both grief and unwavering trust in God's promise. Years passed, and Isaac grew into a beloved son, the fulfillment of promises that once seemed utterly impossible to Abraham. Then came a test unlike any other. God called out to Abraham, and Abraham answered, "Here I am." "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love," the voice commanded, "and sacrifice him as a burnt offering." God specified Mount Moriah, a place 3 days away, where this unimaginable sacrifice was to take place completely. Abraham rose early the next morning, saying nothing to Sarah, carrying this crushing burden entirely alone within himself. He split wood for the burnt offering, saddled his donkey, and took 2 servants along with Isaac on the journey. Isaac walked beside his father, unaware of the purpose behind this journey, trusting completely in Abraham's guidance and love. For 3 agonizing days, Abraham walked in silence, wrestling internally with obedience, love, and unbearable grief combined. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place God had described, rising ominously in the distance. Abraham told his servants to stay behind with the donkey, promising they would both return after worshiping together. Abraham placed the wood on Isaac's shoulders, carrying the fire and knife himself as they ascended the mountain together. As they climbed, Isaac turned to his father and asked where the lamb was for the burnt offering. "God himself will provide the lamb," Abraham answered, his voice steady though his heart broke with every word. They reached the place God had shown him, and Abraham began building an altar with trembling, determined hands. Abraham arranged the wood upon the altar, every motion deliberate, as Isaac stood nearby, innocent and completely trusting. Abraham bound his son Isaac and laid him upon the altar, on top of the wood, his hands shaking violently. Abraham reached out, took the knife, and raised it high, prepared to do the unthinkable in complete obedience. But the angel of the Lord called out urgently, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." "Now I know that you fear God," the angel declared, "since you did not withhold your only son from me." Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, provided as a substitute offering. Abraham sacrificed the ram instead of his son, naming that place, "The Lord will provide forever afterward." Abraham's faith had been tested beyond imagination, and through it, he received the covenant's greatest confirmation yet. Years passed following the mountain, and Sarah lived to the age of 127, her life finally drawing to a close. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba in the land of Canaan, and Abraham mourned deeply, weeping openly for his beloved wife. Abraham approached the Hittites, requesting a burial site, for he owned no permanent land despite God's covenant promise. Abraham negotiated for the cave of Machpelah, insisting on paying full price rather than accepting it as a gift. Abraham weighed out 400 shekels of silver, the price agreed upon, purchasing the field and cave completely. Abraham buried Sarah in the cave of Machpelah, securing the very first permanent possession within the promised land itself. Abraham had grown old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him abundantly in every possible way. Abraham called his most trusted servant, instructing him solemnly to find a wife for Isaac from his homeland. Abraham made the servant swear an oath, forbidding Isaac's marriage to any woman among the surrounding Canaanite people. The servant departed with 10 camels laden with precious gifts, traveling far toward Abraham's ancestral homeland of Nahor. Arriving at a well outside the city at evening, the servant prayed for a clear and unmistakable sign. Before he finished praying, Rebekah appeared, a young woman of remarkable beauty, carrying her jar toward the well. Rebekah offered water not only to the servant, but drew enough for all his camels, fulfilling the sign completely. The servant watched in amazement, recognizing immediately that God had answered his prayer with perfect, unmistakable clarity. The servant gave Rebekah gold jewelry and asked whose daughter she was, discovering she belonged to Abraham's own family. The servant explained his mission fully, and Rebekah's family recognized the Lord's clear hand guiding this entire matter. When asked if she would go immediately, Rebekah answered simply, "I will go," without hesitation or lingering doubt. Rebekah left her family behind, traveling toward an unknown husband, trusting entirely in this remarkable, divinely orchestrated journey. Isaac was meditating in the field one evening when he looked up and saw the camels approaching steadily. Rebekah asked who the approaching man was, and upon learning it was Isaac, she covered herself with a veil. Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent, and she became his wife, and he loved her deeply. Isaac found comfort after his mother's death, and Abraham witnessed the covenant continuing steadily into yet another generation. After Sarah's death, Abraham took another wife named Keturah, continuing to build his household even in his later years. Keturah bore Abraham 6 more sons, expanding his family further, though none would inherit the covenant promise itself. Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines, sending them eastward away from Isaac, while he still lived. Abraham ensured everything he owned would pass to Isaac alone, the sole heir of the covenant promise established long ago. This decision protected the covenant's singular line, ensuring no confusion would arise regarding God's chosen path forward. Abraham had lived a life defined by faith, failure, obedience, and unimaginable trials across nearly 2 centuries of years. He had left everything familiar, wandered through foreign lands, and trusted promises that defied every law of nature itself. Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good old age, an old man and full of years at 175. His sons Isaac and Ishmael came together, setting aside old divisions, to bury their father beside his beloved wife. Abraham was buried in the cave of Machpelah, reunited with Sarah in the very land God had promised him. With Abraham's death, an era ended, yet the covenant he carried would extend far beyond his own lifetime completely. Isaac remained the heir of promise, and through him, the covenant would continue toward Jacob and countless generations beyond. Ishmael, too, became father to 12 tribal rulers, exactly as God had promised Hagar so long ago before. From these 2 sons, entire civilizations would eventually emerge, each claiming Abraham as their shared and foundational father. Judaism traced its lineage through Isaac and Jacob, while Islam honored Ishmael as father of a separate, parallel promise. Christianity, too, looked to Abraham, viewing his unwavering faith as the model for spiritual inheritance beyond bloodline alone. Today, billions across the world trace their spiritual heritage back to this single man from ancient, idol-filled Ur. The promise made beneath countless stars had multiplied beyond anything Abraham could have imagined during his own lifetime. Abraham never lived to see the fullness of what his obedience would ultimately produce across thousands of years. Yet his legacy became undeniable, a foundation supporting 3 of history's most influential and enduring religious traditions. His burial place remains sacred still, visited by descendants of both sons, a physical reminder of shared origin. Abraham's story had ended, yet through faith, sacrifice, and covenant, his legacy would echo forever across human history. The story of Abraham begins not with grandeur, but with an ordinary man living an unremarkable life in a city devoted to idols carved from stone. He was a son of an idol maker, a husband to a barren wife, a wanderer without direction, until a single unseen voice interrupted the quiet rhythm of his days. That voice asked for everything: his homeland, his family's traditions, his sense of belonging, his very identity. And in response, Abraham did something extraordinary in its simplicity. He obeyed. He packed his tents, gathered his household, and walked into a future he could not see, guided only by a promise he could not yet understand. What follows across the pages of Genesis is not the story of a perfect man, but a deeply human one. Abraham lied to protect himself in Egypt, allowing fear to override faith, nearly losing his wife to a foreign king's household. He took matters into his own hands with Hagar, attempting to fulfill God's promise through human effort rather than patient trust, creating consequences that would ripple across generations. He laughed in disbelief when told his ancient body could still father a child. He doubted, hesitated, and stumbled repeatedly along a path that demanded more faith than any human heart could naturally sustain. And yet, within these failures, something remarkable emerges, a portrait of faith not as perfection, but as persistence. Abraham's greatness was never rooted in flawless obedience, but in his willingness to keep returning to the altar, to keep believing despite overwhelming evidence that suggested he shouldn't. Each time he stumbled, he rose again, rebuilding trust in a God whose timing rarely matched his own expectations. This is perhaps the most enduring lesson of his story, that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to keep walking forward despite it. The covenant God made with Abraham was staggering in its scope. A childless wanderer would become the father of nations. A man with no permanent land would receive an everlasting inheritance. A single act of obedience beneath a canopy of stars would multiply into descendants too numerous to count. This promise defied every law of biology, every limitation of age, every reasonable expectation of what one ordinary life could produce. And yet, it came to pass exactly as spoken, proving that divine promises operate on a timeline entirely separate from human patience. Nowhere is Abraham's faith tested more profoundly than upon Mount Moriah. Asked to sacrifice the very son through whom the covenant was to continue, Abraham faced an impossible contradiction: obedience to God seemingly working against the fulfillment of God's own promise. Yet he climbed that mountain anyway, believing somehow that God would provide a way forward even when no way seemed visible. This act of terrifying surrender became the ultimate symbol of trust, a moment so significant that all three major world religions still look back upon it as foundational to their understanding of faith, sacrifice, and divine provision. The two sons born to Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael, became the roots of two vast branches of humanity. Isaac carried forward the covenant line, becoming father to Jacob, whose descendants would form the 12 tribes of Israel. Ishmael, though separated from the covenant, was not abandoned by God, receiving his own extraordinary promise of multiplication and blessing. From these two brothers, entire civilizations, cultures, and faiths would eventually emerge, forever linking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam back to this single ancient patriarch. Abraham's story reminds us that legacy is rarely measured within a single lifetime. He died having only seen the smallest fragment of what his obedience would ultimately produce: a single son, a single grandson, a small and vulnerable family in a foreign land. He never witnessed the kingdoms, the nations, or the billions of people who would one day trace their spiritual heritage back to his willingness to leave everything behind. Yet his faith, small and imperfect as it was in the moment, became the seed from which an incalculable harvest eventually grew. Perhaps this is the story's most profound truth, that faithfulness in the present rarely reveals its full significance until long after we are gone. Abraham could not see the future his obedience was building, yet he walked forward anyway, trusting a promise larger than his own understanding. His life stands as a testament to the idea that ordinary people, willing to trust an extraordinary calling, can become the foundation for something far greater than themselves. Today, across deserts, cities, and continents, billions of people still look back toward Abraham, not as a distant myth, but as a spiritual father whose journey continues to shape how humanity understands faith, sacrifice, and covenant. His story did not end at his burial in the cave of Machpelah. It continues in every act of faith that dares to trust the unseen, every step taken toward an uncertain future, and every promise believed long before its fulfillment becomes visible. Abraham left Ur not knowing where he was going. He arrived in eternity, having become the father of many nations. And somewhere between those 2 points, an ordinary man became one of history's most extraordinary examples of what it means to believe.